Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of Early Access Reviews, we are going to be taking a look at version 3.3 second half Nihility class Debuffer / Sub-DPS Cipher, right? We have already taken a look at how her kit works with the event, where we can already see her Eidolons and kits, so we pretty much know roughly 80% of what she does. We are going to be taking a deeper look into her performances in the endgame and the various different team comps, as well as light cones, mindscapes, etc. So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Just a little bit of a heads up, I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little bit scuffed because I'm having a very bad sore throat and like I can barely even speak properly, so the volume is a little bit weird. Just please do excuse me for this early access review, right? So in summary, Cipher is going to be version 3's third true damage sub DPS with a built-in follow-up attacks and debuffs, very high speed with 14 built-in speed in the tracers, and possible to build in two different ways of either full debuffer support or crit focus sub DPS, suitable for both new and old players alike. She can be ran into a variety of different teams outside of the obvious vertical upgrade to Aircraft and Facial, and in summary, she is a walking 40% vulnerability and 24% true damage debuff from simply existing, no other interactions needed, right? Her ultimate is what basically creates this 24% true damage, being able to utilize it on command whenever you want it, while her personal damage multipliers alone without Patron is far too low to make her a main DPS, especially without vertical investment. So let's just take a look straight into the character kit. For both her basic and her skill, I'm going to combine them into one segment. Essentially, she's actually very skill point positive between the skill and basic attack if players do not care about the debuffs, if you do not have her S1 or resolution in an Aircraft team. The AI most of the time is built in to always use basic attack from what I've seen. Sometimes you use a skill, but most of the time it does always use the basic attack, so she is essentially coded to be a more skill point positive unit. No reason to rush for the ultimate for Cipher, since Patron tally will continuously work from the rest of the team, right? The weaken effect from the skill itself, it is a pretty nice debuff for more survivability comfort, but personally, I'll prefer a more offensive debuff like res down or even more vulnerability, and as such, getting additional skill point from using Cipher's basic and funneling the skill point into other teammates feels better, since most units do want their ultimates more, such as for example Trippy, Hyacinth, Jiaoqiu or Robin, or if you want to spam skills for a main DPS such as Facial or Aircraft. Now I would say for some specific scenarios when the enemies actually hit you for very hard, especially like for example wave 1 in the second half of the current MOC 12 against the general as well as the two blazing Inferno out of space, using Cipher's weaken can actually drastically reduce the damage you're going to be receiving, which makes surviving a lot more comfortable, right? Because 10% damage debuff is still going to be a 10% damage debuff, right? Cipher's entire debuff, inclusive of Essential Light Cone, is going to have a 120% base chance, which means she only needs 20 to 30% EHR to land off a debuff, since her skill also hits multiple times and has a built-in 10% EHR, which means that for the most part you should be going for the crit damage body of Cipher, considering she gets up to 50% additional crit rate. Moving on from her basic and skill, we are going to be taking a look at the ultimate and talent, which basically both combines into one, which is how exactly are we going to be utilizing this true damage from the Patron, right? The main gist for Cipher is that via Patron, you gain Patron stacks to make the true damage portion of the ultimate scale up substantially over time, that is at 24% of the main target as well as 16% from the non-main targets, and every single player should hit 170 speed on Cipher no matter what, so I'm just going to assume everything is going to be doubled from the original 12 and 8% respectively. For the ultimate's true damage distribution itself, it is 25% first for the main target, and then 25, 25, 25 split amongst the 3 targets. If however there's only like 2 or 1 target remaining, then the true damage will be distributed accordingly, so you don't have to worry about any overkill damage or like some damage dilution, all that kind of stuff, right? And this is also where the 24% true damage comes from, so whatever you rack up from Cipher's Patron, it will always be distributed as a 100% true damage conversion based on the number of targets remaining, and this also technically goes up a little bit more than 24% based on the 16% non-main target patrons, but keep in mind this does not take into account overflow damage. So for example, if you see Aircraft doing like 2 million, 3 million damage against 5 targets, but like you know the other 4 targets are all mobs, all of the overflow damage would not factor into the Patron, otherwise you'll just be completely busted, right? Keep in mind that the true damage from Cipher's ultimate, it does not really care about any damage or stats that Cipher herself has, and it is purely based on how much higher the Patron stacks themselves are. So while while Sao Solo can boost Cipher's personal damage by a little bit, which is the raw damage portion, the crit as well as ultimate damage actually won't affect the actual true damage. So this is also why players can opt for a high speed, low damage build without affecting patron charge time, since it is ultimately dependent on your main DPS and how quickly can your team deal damage to stack on patron by itself, right? And then jumping on to the technique, so to summarize everything, it is going to be a quality of life from a farming perspective, because 50 consumables is quite nice, so new players can definitely make use of this and farm some random items. Otherwise, just use the buff and you enter into battle, right? And then going into the trace, for the very first trace, this has been confirmed to be a 40% damage vulnerability, as you can see from the same keywords as Jiaoqiu's Ashen Rose, right? I've also confirmed this with an in-battle footage from a basic attack from higher scene, as seen from a basic increasing by roughly 39.95% from 1727 to 2417. Now there's basically no condition whatsoever, perma uptime for a 40% vulnerability, very similar to Fuchs Exo Toughness mechanic, making Cipher the highest vulnerability debuffer in the entire game, slightly outclassing Jiaoqiu's Ashen Rose base 15% vulnerability plus 20% capped at 5 stacks, right? This is going to be at 35%, but if you do at Jiaoqiu's ultimate damage vulnerability, it would be 50% at the end of the day, but at a baseline, you instantly get this 40% vulnerability, no charge up time required whatsoever. The 100% crit damage on the follow-up is technically like a secondary effect, because like I mentioned, Cipher's base multipliers herself is very low, in fact far too low for her to even consider to be a main DPS without making use of Cipher again. So you can see from the ultimate skill, it's going to be at 120% and 200% multiplier respectively, which is honestly just very low. Then moving on into the second trace, you will essentially record 8% of non-true damage tally outside of the main target, which helps us stack patron even more outside of single target, inclusive of 3 and 5 targeting, making it a lot more usable than just single target hunt DPS such as Fei Xiao. And very importantly for this particular trace, it acts sort of similarly to Triby's E1, where it does have a sort of like a smart targeting function of compounding damage done to the mobs and indirectly transferring them onto the main target plus 2 adjacent target for the true damage hit itself from Cipher's ultimate. Now this can be especially useful with AoE ultimates like Acheron and Herta having damage on the mobs, and Patron basically helps us convert 8% of these damage back into the main 3 targets. Now keep in mind, like I mentioned just now, the overflow damage would not be factored, and any damage from the mobs received will be transferred into 8% or basically 60% at its 170 speed into Patron stacking for the main target. And speaking of this 60%, this is going to be Cipher's most important trace. Increasing her speed to 170 gives you a 50% crit rate and 100% recorded value for your patron. So it is absolutely essential to hit 170 on Cipher. I don't care what it does, 2-piece speed, 4-piece speed, whatever speed, do everything you can to hit 170 speed for Cipher for the 50% crit chance, and most importantly the 100% buff to patron's damage scaling. So number one priority, no matter what build I'm going to be doing for this, will be the most important thing for every single Cipher build, right? And then going on to the minor traces, 10% EHR, 14 speed and 14.4% quantum damage are all pretty nice, and the skill leveling priority is going to be the ultimate, followed by talent, followed by skill, followed by basic. But frankly speaking, all these don't really impact that much, because like I mentioned, Cipher's multipliers are going to be quite low, so as long as you get the ultimate up, it's basically going to be good to go, right? Now jumping into a little bit more of a generalized usage from my observations, the very first thing is, what exactly is Cipher's role within a team building, right? Because her kit can be a little bit confusing at first glance as to, is she a debuffer, is she a DPS, is she a debuff support, a follow-up support, or is she somewhere in between? So from what I've noticed, the number one most important thing to establish is that Cipher herself actually doesn't deal that much damage, despite players probably seeing like massive ultimate damage numbers with a very high patron stack, because as per her kit, those numbers are not coming from Cipher herself, rather it is generated from the rest of a team, namely the main DPS and the alternative, maybe like a second main DPS like Triby, to give Cipher more patron stacks so that the ultimate looks like it's dealing a lot of damage, right? If Cipher does not have another DPS that can help us generate these patron at a fast pace, then it will be way too slow, which will result in a significantly lower damage output. And I do want to keep in mind that I want to try to test out Super Brick Cipher, because technically that should work, but we will try that in the live server in the future, right? In any case, Cipher's existence is to essentially stand there and add on this 40% vulnerability debuff, as well as the 24% plus true damage for entire team to basically just do more damage, right? With the 40% vulnerability, you can see from like the normal numbers your team are going to be doing, and then this additional 24% true damage is basically going to be coming from Cipher's ultimate, even though it was your main DPS that essentially contributed to these patron stacks. Like I mentioned again and again, Cipher's personal multiplier is way too low, and her follow-up attack frequency is also far too little, so her base basic and skill doesn't really offer much to the debuffs applied aside from what she already has, which is the 40% vulnerability as well as the 24% true damage. So with that being established, Cipher can actually fit into a variety of different teams, especially for players who lack their respective best in slot supports. I've tried it with Akron, I've tried it with Facial, Cassius, Herta, and the performances that have been honestly much better than I initially expected. Though if I had to choose a single most best in slot, most upgraded team vertical investment wise, then that would be Akron, and I'll talk about it in the team segment, right? For Pure Vision and Apoc Shadows, I do feel that her niche comes from holding Patron, or rather her ultimate, in wave 1 for Pure Vision and let it go from wave 2 onwards, and do a very similar thing in Apoc Shadows where you hold right before the weakness break, though sometimes if you want to let it go before the ultimate, because if you can break the target, or sometimes if the buff from breaking the target is going to give you 100% energy regeneration, then by all means go for it, right? And speaking of ultimate, I do want to make another observation, which is going to be the ultimate frequency. Now I'm pretty sure every one of you guys have seen from like some funny numbers on the internet where Cipher deals like 1 million, 2 million, 10 million damage from a single ultimate that, oh my god, just keep stacking on Patron to as fast as possible, and that's basically the way you play Cipher, right? Now keep in mind, Cipher's Patron, it does have infinite stacking capabilities. So technically, if you wish to, you could stack on this Cipher's Patron forever and just never use the ultimate and just let go of some like absolutely ridiculous damage per screenshot numbers, right? Now the main reason for this is majority of a Patron damage will be tallied from a main DPS or even sub-DPS tribute, so Cipher's contribution to this is going to be much lower. So whether or not the ultimate is used frequently, it will not drastically impact the overall damage from Cipher herself. And that being said though, more frequent ultimates, it does result to more numbers of hits as an ultimate, because you can see one hit, for example, like a Negador's War Armor, it will contribute to one additional hit. It also means more debuff stacks for Acheron and more toughness bar damage in the whole, right? And at the end of the day, if you were to use this ultimate with more frequency, it will still lead to more damage, no matter how small the additional damage is going to be, because whether you stack on Patron or just letting go of the ultimate every single time when she can use it whenever possible, it is generally going to be the exact same, because the Patron stacking is going to be coming from the rest of the team anyways, right? So from what I've seen from all my different teams, the number varies from between the 400s to almost like 1,000 on a normal basis without intentionally holding your ultimate. So the moment Cipher gets the ultimate, that should be the numbers you're looking at, between 400 and 1,000s. It really drastically depends on what teams are you going to be using Cipher on while on a full DPS gear. So while it is pretty fun to see some online numbers scaling like 10 billion damage, it is ultimately damage per screenshot, and it doesn't imply holding ultimates means you're going to be dealing more damage with Cipher, right? There are, however, niche situations where you will intentionally hold off Cipher's ultimate for as long as possible to deal damage more on a single target in the next wave. More prevalently going to be seen from Pure Fiction in wave 1, or maybe in Memory of Chaos. If you can actually kill the targets in wave 1 without using Cipher's ultimate, then you can save this to instantly deal high damage to the next wave, which is going to be the boss wave, right? Keep in mind, for this specific true damage from the ultimate, it actually ignores all damage rest effects, such as, for example, Negador before War Armor breaks or Flame Reverse damage resist, and as such, Cipher's kit actually allows for a little bit more comfort against these enemies. So that's pretty much going to be Cipher's character kit. And now jumping into the light cone, her S1 is going to be one of the most universal signature light cones in the entire game, where almost every single Nihility unit can make use of the 18% speed, debuff application, as well as the defense down. Now that being said, resolution and tutorial light cones are still very decent alternatives, right? So taking a look at the signature light cone, in summary, it's going to be an 18% speed buff and a 24% defense down, counting as two separate debuffs. Now the wording is a little bit weird, but both are tested to be active at the same time as long as they appear in the enemy debuff section. You can see over here, one is Theft and one is Bamboozle. Both of them stack on, that's going to be 24%, right? So not only does it allow Cipher's basic attack to also apply debuffs or Akron, it also translates into roughly 9 speed subs to help you drastically easier to hit that 170 speed threshold, making a sub-DPS Cipher build on 4-piece diver much more feasible without sacrificing too much, right? And above all, for this specific signature light cone, it pretty much allows every single Nihility debuffer to make use of the speed buff as well as the defense down, basically adding like a resolution, the one of our OG 4-star Nihility. It is basically an upgraded version of resolution, right? So very flexible. So your Pella, Fuchs, Serwolf, Jiaoqiu, or even your DOTs like Kafka, if we see Kafka's role being more like a sub-DPS DOT enabler, they can all basically make use of Cipher's signature light cone. Now without her signature light cone, players players can still rely on the good old reliable resolution, which is the de facto 4-star for almost every single inherited debuffer, or tutorial icon if you already have resolution on someone else, such as for example Jiaoqiu. Although I personally prefer Jiaoqiu to have tutorial for the additional EHR as well as the ultimate spam than Cipher. So at the end of the day, most situations, if you do not want to run the S1, then resolution should be your best bet, right? The damage differential is actually very small. The main thing is basically to stack on debuffs on the basic as well as to hit the 170 speed for the patrons 100%, right? So you can take a look into the comparison over here. I did a test with Signature Lycon as well as Resolution S5 between an Acheron Ultimate as well as Cypher's own follow-up attack. The difference is roughly 5% higher for Acheron's Ultimate without Jiaoqiu's field, while Cypher's personal follow-up is roughly going to be 13% higher, right? So in overall value, I really like Cypher's S1 for how universal it is, on top of the ease of building 170 speed with a higher defense amplification, which stacks on very nicely with most Nihility class DPS, inclusive of crit and DOT. I don't think, however, this S1 is going to be a must because her kit already has a built-in 40% vulnerability and 24% true damage. And players, you can still run a Resolution S5 for a 60% defense down, and you can just run all in speed to hit 170 speed threshold, because like I mentioned, whether or not Cipher is going to be having the crit values from like Diver or like going to go for the 4P speed, it doesn't really matter as long as you hit 170 speed. So this is really just a very nice luxury to have. So good for players who either want more personal DPS for Cipher or investing in this Litecoin for other Nihility debuffers, such as basically acting as a Resolution Pro Max, right? Then jumping on into the Relic segment, there are basically two builds. One is going to be a pure debuffer to all in 170 speed, especially prevalent for people without the S1, or you can just go for the Sub-DPS 4-piece diver build, right? For the main set of subsets, your body should always be crit damage over crit rate, speed boost, quantum damage sphere, and attack percentage rope over energy regeneration rope. For subsets, just go as many speed subsets as you can up until 170 speed, then you can go for the crit value afterwards, right? So between the two different builds, they are all essentially running the almost exact same main stats. Debuffer, you could consider running energy regeneration instead of attack, and then for the 4-piece, it's either going to be 2+2 speed or 4-piece eagle, but for 4-piece eagle, you still need to hit 170 speed regardless of what that happens, which could be very difficult. Now for the 2-piece inside, you can be Luke Shaka, it can be Von Ware, it could even be the 2-piece Calvagini just for the additional 6% speed, right? Then for the crit build, it is pretty much the same main stat where you use attack rope instead of energy regeneration rope for the 4-piece diver and 2-piece Sao Solo or 2-piece Glamorph, right? The damage differential between Sao Solo and Glamorph for a crit DPS build is actually extremely small, only 2.8% favoring Glamorph with a 6 additional patron stack lead but 25% less crit damage. So whatever subsets you got that's better, you can just run that, right? So the bottom line is, which build should you be using? The debuff build or the crit DPS build? For the short answer, whichever build that allows you to hit the 170 speed. That's pretty much it. The long answer is, for the debuffer build, this should be the baseline build for any brand new players or any players that are only going to be getting E0 as your Cipher if you cannot hit 170 speed from the subsets alone. Because for Cipher's own kit with the trace and speed boots, this will put her at 145 speed, which means you need roughly 12 speed subsets or 35 speed to make the 170 speed threshold. So between 5 different gears, that is roughly 2.5-ish speed subs for every single piece of gear. So since the Signature Lycon is not going to be used for an S0, and tutorial as well as resolution cannot give her any speed unless you want to use S1 Kafka, which doesn't really make too much sense, it is not that easy to build a 170 speed Cipher without any effects from like 2-piece Hackerspace, 2-piece Sacrados, or 2-piece Calvagini, right? So for this debuff build, it makes it a lot easier for all players to make use of Cipher's full kit to hit the 170 speed subset while still giving a good amount of debuffs for Acheron, as well as activating her 40% vulnerability, 24% true damage simply by existing. Remember that the patron damage, again and again, it is unaffected by Cipher sets or even substats, whatever she is, because it is only based on how much more patron can you stack with the rest of the team, right? For the crit build, on the other hand, this is pretty much the end game build for players who can actually hit 170 speed without any of the 2-piece speed bonuses. And I personally found myself using this build more as long as I can still hit 170 speed. You can basically sacrifice any crit value to hit 170 speed, just make sure you hit it, and this is definitely going to be a lot more attainable with the S1, which gives you an 18% speed buff, right? So while the damage at the end of the day is, like I mentioned, is not very significant, this will still be the go-to build for anyone with a good speed set on Diver, on Glamorph, on Sao Solo, or if you pull for the Signature Icon, or you simply have both, right? Because at the end of the day, more damage is always going to be better because there really isn't anything else you want to build on Cipher aside from more damage, right? For the Glamorph effects, it can be easily attainable with Cipher stats and gives a little bit more, like I mentioned, roughly 2.5 0.8%, a little bit higher than Sao Solo, but at the end of the day, just look at the subsets, and hopefully this helps you guys build the Cipher that you want. Moving on into the Eidolon portion, for Cipher's Eidolon, they are actually very straightforward with a very basic raw numbers upgrade, either from faster patron stacking or more debuff percentage, right? For the Eidolon 1, it is gonna be 150% of the recorded patron value, and the follow-up attack gives you an 80% attack buff. So this essentially turns your true damage from 24% true damage into 36% true damage, because you basically stack on 50% faster, right? On the second line, the 80% attack buff is not too bad and is basically permanent. Like I mentioned, her multipliers are far too low to be the main focus of team building, so the first line is gonna be the more important one, basically giving her an additional 12% more true damage, which then can go up a little bit more if you're factoring the additional true damage you're getting from the non-main target, especially from AoE ultimates, right? Then for the Eidolon 2, it basically goes up your vulnerability from 40% to a 70%. That is pretty much it. No other things. Very, very straightforward to understand. And numbers wise, this is a substantial step up in terms of raw damage increase, because 30% vulnerability is absolutely massive. So nothing fancy, but it is still a very, very good damage amplification. And for the Eidolon 4, basically deal more damage. Not too much to talk about. And then Eidolon 6, it basically helps Cipher to keep up the patron stacks even more, a little bit similar to Hyacinth's healing tally refund, while substantially increasing her follow-up damage multiplier, right? So yep, just big bones for the E6. So in general, if you are going to be thinking between E1 or S1, I will personally lean far more into the S1 due to the raw stats, flexibility, and utility provides, not just to Cipher, but for pretty much any utility units you can make use of this. Like I mentioned, the Resolution Pro Max, right? And also, it is cheaper than the unit itself. Although I do want to say the E1's 150% tally damage is nice, stacking at essentially 33% faster pace, the 80% attack buff is just really not important. But at the end of the day, E0 S0 Cipher is still going to be completely viable because the kit is more or less complete, especially if you just run the Resolution like code. And with that, we are going to be going into the final segment, which is going to be the team comps for Cipher. For the following team comps, I spent an extensive amount of time cooking up more than 10 different combinations in various team comps, so smash that like button and subscribe button, because this cat, it took me an obscene amount of time to prepare. Wow, I'm like, you know, basically sick. So yep, that's pretty much it, right? All criteria will be stated below, with Cipher being E0 S1, full DPS diver plus Sao Solo plus at least 170 speed, mostly done on auto to maintain a consistency, as well as to make it a little bit more approachable for the casual player base that only plays Honkai style on auto, right? So let's just first talk about Akron, which in my opinion is gonna be the most obvious upgrade. I tested this with the combination between 3B, Cipher, and Jiaoqiu, with an E0 S1 Akron and an E0 S1 Hyacinth against the upcoming MOC 12 True Sting in a non-lightning weak environment on full auto, because in my opinion, Pokke is just... Do you have cast risk? No? Okay, bye-bye. Right, so I tested it out mostly against the upcoming MOC 12, right? So you can see over here from the cycles, I feel that this is going to be Cipher's current best in stock team at this point, not because she's replacing Pella or Tribi for a 2 nihility comp in an E0 S1 Akron, nor is she exactly like a direct upgrade over Jiaoqiu, because you can see over here, they both achieved a 4 cycle clear on full auto, the only difference being Cipher plus Jiaoqiu achieving a 3 cycle, right? So the main important thing right here is gonna be her stack generation is one of the more consistent ones, unaffected by an environment. Like as you can see just now in the previous couple of MOCs, if the enemy targets, especially the mobs such as Negador Spears or Flame Reverse clones, if they don't move, then Jiaoqiu's stack generation for Akron is actually going to be a lot slower, whereas Cipher is not going to be affected by this environment. And on top of that, Akron's ultimate also gives a tremendous amount of patron, because, you know, all of the other damage outside from the main target, it can also add towards a 60% tally count towards the true damage, further scaling Akron's basically the entire team's damage upwards, right? Now, while I ran both at the same team, Jiaoqiu and Cipher managed to perform the best on full auto for 3 cycle, and there is a very good chance that we're going to be seeing even more upgrades to an Akron team comp with the upcoming Silverwolf rework, right? One key thing to note is that for now, Cipher may be an E0 Akron teammate. This is, however, not the strongest DPS in version 3, and that will go into someone else a little bit later after, right? And jumping to the next unit, that is going to be Facial. Tested the following combinations between Robin, Cipher, as well as Topaz, with an E0 S1 Facial and an E0 S1 Ventrine against the upcoming MOC 12 Hule, right? So you can see over here, first and foremost, yep, I had to manual with Team 2 using Cipher and Robin because the Wave 1 enemies, especially the Sun Dog, it kept letting go of its full blast, and the AI either doesn't aim it first or don't use Adventuring Shield and Cipher weaken. In fact, between Aggron and Fei Xiao, I would say that Aggron is far more auto-friendly because the AI always lets go of Fei Xiao's ultimates as fast as possible, leading to a huge waste in terms of total damage output for both your Fei Xiao, your Adventuring, or even your Robin's ultimate, because the entire gimmick for your Fei Xiao team is gonna be stack on all of your debuffs, such as your Topaz debuffs, your Adventuring's crit damage increase debuff, and let it rip for a single double Fei Xiao back-to-back under Robin's ultimate effect. So if the AI is just gonna relentlessly throw out these ultimates at a sub-optimal timing, the damage differential is going to be absolutely massive, specifically to Fei Xiao's team con far more than Aggron anyways, right? So the bottom line is, Robin is still going to be a fundamental core for Fei Xiao teams, and her synergy is just far too strong to let go, even after almost basically 1 year after release, going into a 5-cycle run by running both Topaz and Cipher without Robin. Now, between Topaz and Cipher respectively, I've noticed that Hule was a much more favorable fight to Topaz because of the fire weakness and less target swapping against the boss itself, while Cipher could more or less perform similar results with both of them ending in a 3-cycle. Between both teams of Aggron and Fei Xiao, I would say Aggron generated far more patron than Fei Xiao, which is to be expected because Aggron has a massive AoE multiplier with the 16% additional on non-patron target stacking. So one could say that Cipher's kit was utilized more in an Aggron team compared to a Fei Xiao team, especially considering that you are essentially replacing potentially either Topaz, Mose, or Han March 7th, and the upgrade is not going to be that significant because I feel that follow-up team, they are more or less already solidified, whereas for Aggron, there's still a lot more room to grow because we still haven't seen like a proper second nihility slot for at least up until this day, right? So if Cipher's follow-up attack frequency was a little bit higher, then maybe she could outclass Topaz, because on top of that, she also gives us a 40% vulnerability and 24% true damage, but as of now, they are still relatively balanced within a Fei Xiao team. And now we are going to talk into, pretty much in my opinion, the strongest DPS with Cipher as of this time of recording. That is going to be Castris. Now, I was cooking this up with my friend where what if Cipher's 40% vulnerability and 24% true damage could potentially rival a E0 Tribi, because Tribi has 30% vulnerability and 24% respen. So I tested it with the following combinations between Tribi, Cipher, RMC, and Hyacinth with an E0 as-on Castris and an E0 as-on Hyacinth against both Pollux as well as the True Sting, with the results finding over here, right? So I wanted to try this with Pollux a little bit more, but that boss is just way too shield for Castris, causing a double full auto 0 cycle. So I decided to move to True Sting for a more neutral environment. So you can see over here, Cipher with Tribi turned out to be exceptionally powerful as a duo, stacking on a 70% vulnerability with respen and true damage. Tribi also further adds on to Cipher's patron with an AoE targeting, hitting almost 1000 patron stacks when she let go of the ultimate. Aside from this absolutely synergistic duo, when I was manualing with RMC and Cipher, I was also able to achieve the exact same clear with RMC, Tribi, E0, S0 auto from a 1-cycle first wave and 2-cycle second wave into a 1-cycle and 1-cycle respectively, right? It was not possible for me to 0-cycle the first wave with my current setup and relics. We are missing basically a little bit of a charge from either the Dragon or the Man, but both teams managed to 1-cycle the second wave against True Sting. And essentially, I couldn't even let go of my 1000 stack Cipher ultimate because Castris actually killed the True Sting way too fast. So I would say that in a theoretical damage scenario, I can foresee RMC Cipher potentially out-damaging an E0 Tribi if True Sting had even more HP for us to make use of Cipher's additional patrons' ridiculous true damage, right? So I would say that for players that did not pull for Tribi and you have no intention of pulling for Tribi and yet you still want to play Castris, Cipher is a really decent alternative, performing very similarly to the very best support in version 3 with an added potential of slotting into future Aggron teams as well. If you have both in the same team, which is basically Tribi and Cipher, then have fun running some goofy art numbers because this team was ridiculously fun to play. So towards the end of this video, I would want to say Cipher's pulling value at the end of the day, even though she's going to be very fun, do keep in mind that we are in a very weird scenario because she's placed right between, in my opinion, the most synergistic sustain for casuals that's going to be Hyacinth, as well as the upcoming Phynon plus Fake Collab banners, right? So even though I think that kit is going to be very fun, players should try to see if they do have enough strategies to at least secure their Fake Collab, because in my opinion, playing gacha games, getting the limited edition units is going to be way more fun than, you know, basically some kind of vertical investment, right? So that is pretty much it. With that, we have come to the end of Cipher's early access review. Let me know what you guys think of her in the comments below, and I will be coming up with a couple of other Cipher Zero Cycle showcases in the upcoming video as well, right? So word of the day is going to be Stretch. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join Twitter. All the best for Gacha Pools. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.